Aloha, I'm Michael Thomas Fumai, composer in residence and director of artistic engagement for the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra. Welcome to Concert Conversations for our Halekulani Masterworks performance of JoAnn Conducts Pictures at an Exhibition, a program featuring works by Kodály, Rodrigo, and Mussorgsky. Joining me on stage today is Hawaii Symphony Orchestra Conductor Emeritus, JoAnn Falletta.
Thank you very much.
And our distinguished guest artist this afternoon is guitarist JIJI. JIJI makes her debut with the HSO this afternoon. But JIJI, this is not your first time to our islands.
No, this is not my first time, but I'm so excited to make my debut here.
And JoAnn, you are a fellow guitarist, so it's very special that we have both you and JIJI to perform one of the most beautiful works ever composed for the guitar. And there is a very touching story behind it.
I should say that I think this is the most popular concerto of the 20th century, and that's saying a lot. When you hear it, you will know it. It is amazing, and it does have a touching story. Do you want to tell us? Shall I tell the story?
You can tell the story.
In the second, Rodrigo, who was actually blind and wrote nonetheless such beautiful pieces, had just lost a child in birth, a little girl, and he was very, very overwhelmed with sadness. And that you will hear in the beautiful second movement, because that voice, that English horn singing, is the voice of a gypsy who would sing something very sad, Sayeta. It's him mourning his little child, and that melody has become so beloved.
Yeah.
In fact, for a moment, it really overshadows the guitar a bit.
Yes.
So, what do you think about that moment? Is it your favorite part?
Yeah, second movement is one of my favorites, and I actually play Spain by Korea. Do you guys know? Yes, so I actually play that as well, and I love the melody. It's just so breathtaking, and I'm always just like improvising in a way, and it is one of my favorite pieces to play ever on the guitar.
I was introduced to this piece through the second movement, and I believe this is music that no matter where you are in your life as a listener, when you hear it, it is music that makes you aware of yourself. Well, JIJI, could you tell us a little bit about your guitar, the instrument you'll use today to perform the Rodrigo?
So my guitar is made by a luthier named Gernot Wagner, and he is one of the first kind of this modern technique luthier creator of something called double top guitars. And, it's using two different woods and then pressed together and then really carved out thinly, so it creates a very loud sound. So he's so popular, you can't get his guitar. You have to be on a waiting list for 15 years. Either he's making one a year, I do not know, but he's very nice. I've spoken to him on the phone once, and I always try to update him. But very, very popular guitarist, and I'm very excited that you get to hear it tonight.
I'm thrilled that we won't have to wait 15 years to hear it. With the Rodrigo, we have a very personal cry from the composer. And in the Warhorse on today's program, the pictures at an exhibition, Mussorgsky also was grieving a friend, and there is a touching story behind its creation as well.
It is a very touching story. Mussorgsky was very close friends with a man named Victor Hartmann. Mussorgsky, of course, was a pianist and a composer, and Victor Hartmann was a painter. And they were always together and walking, and Mussorgsky would notice that Victor Hartmann often, although he was a young man, had to stop and rest and then go on, and he would get very pale. And Mussorgsky was trying always to encourage him, saying, Victor, you're a sensitive person, don't worry, we'll take it slow, you're okay, don't be anxious. Well, soon after that, Victor Hartmann died. He was indeed very sick. He had something wrong with his heart, which no one could have helped him with. But Mussorgsky somehow felt responsible, and he became so depressed and just sunk in this year of gloom. He was so sad. Finally, his friend said, Modest, we're going to honor Victor with an exhibition on the 100th, on the first year anniversary of his death. We're going to do this. You have to be a part of it. You have to come and be with us. So Mussorgsky did come, and he walked through the exhibition, and he was very moved and very inspired, and he decided, I can immortalize this in music. So then he wrote one of the greatest piano pieces. I think you feel the same way. Pictures at an exhibition about that exhibition. All of these are paintings or sketches of the artist Victor Hartmann. Now, we'd never know the name Victor Hartmann if it weren't for Mussorgsky. He immortalized him in this music. And then 50 years later, Maurice Ravel, one of the greatest orchestrators of all time, decided to rewrite. Rewrite it is not really the word. How would you say, to transcribe it or to recast it for orchestra. And that's what you hear tonight, the orchestral version, which is so extraordinary.
I liken it to adapting a novel into a full-length feature film. Some things will need to be adjusted, but if you look at the original piano score, Mussorgsky was very much thinking about the orchestra, especially the last movement where you have all of those chords. And on a piano, when you sustain a note, it will eventually decay. But with an orchestra, you can sustain a note indefinitely with the brass, with the strings and the winds and the percussion. And you get to hear those chords in all its glory. There is music that returns quite often, and we hear almost variations or transformations of it. It is as if it is walking music, as if we were walking from picture to picture.
It is, because actually, if you look at the program, you'll see movements called promenade, and that is Mussorgsky walking. So when you hear the very famous first notes of the trumpet, that's Mussorgsky striding into the exhibit, his first steps into the exhibit, and he sees a painting. And this one is an interesting one. It's the gnome. It's a fierce creature, and you'll hear that. So you get a lot of fast changes in this. But the promenade always comes back. I mean, once he's looked at the painting, he goes on again. But what is so interesting to me, he was such a genius, Mussorgsky, that the painting that he's just seen influences how he's walking. So he sees something and he strides on quickly, or if he sees something that is maybe a little sad, you hear that in the next walking that he does. So interesting that it's tied together with that kind of emotion. He even sees a painting where Victor Hartmann has painted himself in that. And then there's a very sad movement after that where he's really missing him because he's seeing him in that painting. So it's a very profound piece, don't you think, Michael?
Absolutely. And we always think the last movement is incredibly grand, but in those harmonies that he chooses, those sonorities, there's such a deep friendship that I hear and can feel, a pride of displaying his friend's artwork, and it always brings tears to my eyes. JIJI, I'm told that there is a transcription of pictures at an exhibition for guitar. Do you know about this?
Yes. It was arranged and transcribed by Kazuhito Yamashita, Japanese guitarist. And actually, my friends, when they saw the program note, they actually thought I was playing the Mussorgsky. And it's like, JIJI, I didn't know you played Mussorgsky. And I was like, no, I cannot. That is impossible.
So, JoAnn, we really have a very colorful tour of Europe. We end in Russia with pictures. We have the Rodrigo from Spain, and we start the program with a unknown piece to most of us from Hungary. And there is a cry in this piece as well, one for freedom.
It's a very emotional piece. You know, when Dean and I were talking about the program, he said, "Would you like to do the pictures and the exhibition?" I said, "Well, yes, I would love that." And then we knew you were coming to play the Rodrigo. And he said, "Well, you choose the next piece." And I said, "Well, let me choose something that people don't know, because I wanted you maybe to discover this." I've become an enormous fan, a passionate fan of the music of Zoltán Kodály. Kodály is how we pronounce his name. A great Hungarian composer. He wasn't that prolific because he spent much of his life working on the Kodály method. The Kodály method was a way of teaching children music, and he had this feeling that the world would be a better place if every child learned music in some way. So he spent much of his life doing that, but he did write incredible music, and it's very Hungarian. You know, he went on a sort of a pilgrimage when he was young in Hungary to all of the little towns, writing down music, because at that time folk music was learned only by ear. You know, your grandfather would sing you a song and you'd learn it. And he knew the world was changing then, this is the 20th century, that all of that was going to be lost, that was going to be gone. So he and Bela Bartok also went with him to save that. They would ask people to sing and they'd write down the melodies. And he absorbed these folk melodies. So everything he wrote is based upon folk music. And it's very Hungarian, it's very lively, but it's also it's quite changeable. It has 16 variations, all of which is quite different.
Kodály and Bartók really were great friends together, and they set out to preserve Hungarian music authentically and to use them in their compositions. We look back at the Hungarian dances of Brahms and the Hungarian rhapsodies of Liszt, and that's beautiful music, but also very much through a Germanic lens. And so, Bartók and Kodály really did ask themselves, why is our music not sounding very Hungarian? And so they very much really took upon themselves to be ethnomusicologists and to preserve the complexities of Hungarian music in composition. Now, the image of a peacock is symbolic in this case, one of freedom.
I wanted to tell you just a little bit of what it has in the score, because this always fascinated me. The peacock, as you said, is the Hungarian symbol of freedom, the bird. And they were never free. They were not free until 1990. This time they were under the Nazis when he was writing. They were never free. And he has a little poem at the beginning that he insists on putting in the score. The peacock flew over the prison and freed the prisoners. The peacock flew over the prison and freed the prisoners. The peacock flew over the prison and did not free the prisoners. Very mystical. I asked my teacher at that time, George Mestre was Hungarian, I said, "Maestro, what does that mean?" And he said, "You have to be Hungarian to understand that." So, but you realize what this man is trying to say, and he's using this peacock and this piece as a way of buoying up the spirits of the Hungarians who were really suffering. And you hear some tragedy in this, you hear some mysticism, you hear things that might even sound like the peacock's wings, 3 flutes playing, they sound like 3 birds, but there's a lot of joy. And in the end, he's using a lot of wild Hungarian dances, and you can hear that. We will prevail. In the end, we will have our own country. And of course they did, but much later.
JoAnn, JIJI, both of you are champions of working with composers today, but also, performing, commissioning, and recording their works. I wonder, where does this drive and this mission come from?
I always had a very special feeling when I was playing music by living composers. Although, of course, these people were not, but still, they were in the 20th century. Because I'm not a composer, she is, but I'm not a composer, but I felt when I played music by living composers, I was a little part of their brain. I could help. I could imagine what they were thinking. These fantastic people who write music, and I was always a big fan of that. So I do a lot of contemporary music, a lot of 20th century music that's been forgotten. And Kodály, I felt, especially Kodály, was someone who was so unjustly not played. Now, many of you probably have never heard a piece by Kodály. I'm hoping this will be the first time that there's so much music we should play, right? And not always go back to the 18th century, which is great music too, so I always loved exploring and discovering.
I think as a guitarist, kind of similar to pianist, you play alone a lot, and I love working on dead composers, but sometimes I can't call them or talk to them. I can't talk to Bach, like, what were you thinking about this fugue? It's impossible. But I loved having this kind of collaborative relationship, I think connection with my composer friends. And most of the composers I've ever worked with I had a personal relationship with them. And it's really important to me to kind of have this, this very trusting relationship to work on making this music together. So I find that really special because it does get really lonely when you're in a practice room and talking to yourself for 8 hours. So I'm an extrovert, so I really like working with other people. So that was kind of one of the reasons I like working with living composers.
As a composer, I can absolutely relate to the loneliness of the job. And so, when we look at history, we see that relationships from Mozart, Beethoven, to Haydn, to Bartók and Kodály, to even all the composers living today, it is these relationships that produce beautiful music and music that we're able to perform today. And so, we are very grateful that we can perform live.
Hopefully now we're all recovering from the pandemic. Our orchestras are recovering now, so people are coming back to realize that listening together is a very special thing. I hope you feel the same way as I do. It's great to listen on your stereo or your headphones, but listening in a room with other people, there's always something sacred about it, don't you think, Michael?
Absolutely, and I think the proof is in physics, the science of sound and music. When JIJI plucks her strings on the guitar, or when Iggy bows across the strings of the violin, they are creating sound waves that travel instantly through the air. They reach our eardrums, they resonate, and those electrical signals are then turned into sound in our brains. And it is the most beautiful form of communication between individuals, and one that is very human. And so I think there is great beauty that cannot be captured on headphones. And so it is only in a room, in a shared communal experience where we're all together doing the same thing, listening, is there something very special that happens in live performance.
Do you feel that has an influence on how people feel on their brains when they actually hear live music? I think so. I sometimes notice that when people come into a concert in Buffalo, they're maybe a little tired. They're not sure that they have the time to come, or they've had so many problems. They're thinking about them, but they sit down, and then 2 hours later, I look at them, and they look different. Somehow they've forgotten about those things, but they didn't even try to forget. Music just led them to another place. So I hope that all of you will always feel that with music, that it leads you to some place inside yourself that is very beautiful. And that's why we make music, for you. It makes us very happy.
Maestra Falletta, JIJI, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Today's Conductor's Circle sponsors are the Volunteers in Paradise and Steve and Marilyn Katzman. The Masterworks title sponsor is the Halekulani Hotel. I'm Michael Thomas Fumai, and this is Concert Conversations at Your Hawaii Symphony Orchestra.